So this is our last book-centric meeting, like for a specific book, for Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. Yay! I feel like it's like such an accomplishment that like we all made it to this point and like reread the whole series. It was long.
They seem a lot longer than they actually are, huh?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, it was a great reread of the series, that we were able to like look at it from a different point of view and kind of like, especially for those of us who hadn't read it in a while, like see things from a different perspective from the animals that were in the books. There are definitely quite a few animals in this book that kind of take on like a very big point in the plot. One of which, of course, is dear Hedwig, poor Hedwig. And I don't want to dwell like too long on her because it is very sad what happens. But I'm just curious, how do we feel about sort of Harry's reaction to her death? Because to me, it was very different than how I would react to like a companion animal in the family passing away. But I'm just curious to hear what everyone else thought about that and how that was depicted.
I'm trying to like determine how much space I want to give Harry, right? Considering the situation that he found himself in and how Hedwig actually died, I'm trying to determine how much of that situation played into his reaction, right? Because to be honest, he was being attacked, everybody's being attacked. Fred was it Fred or George? I think it's Fred,
George,
who had his ear.
George was the yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, I don't know. I'm trying to weigh all those different things and give him some kind of leeway to his reaction. But how much? That's where I'm getting caught up on.
So I just looked up how old snowy owls live, and it says 10 years or more in the wild and 28 years in captivity. So poor Hedwig was probably young when she was sold, right? And so maybe she was 10, but that's really sad to think that she's only like a third of her age that she could
Yeah.
have been.
Yeah. I think the thing that got me the most emotional about that situation was that basically up until the time that they, left to take Harry to a safe place, um, like there were all these sentences talking about how Hedwig hadn't really been out of her cage, and had spent like the summer cooped up again. And I'm just like, there's got to be a better way. Like I know Harry was, understandably had to be cooped up, but did Hedwig really have to be cooped up at that point? Like, I feel like she could have had a little bit more freedom. It was kind of sad that she didn't have that like before she passed away. And that's how I feel a lot of times about like, certain animals that you'll hear about on the news. Like for instance, in hoarding situations, where they don't have that freedom and their life is like short-lived and kind of sad and cramped and cooped up. And then you're like, they had so much more to experience and be out there and stuff. Um, but yeah, Wands up for Hedwig for sure. Cause yeah, I think she may be the one creature that was in the entire, like every single book of the series. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think she and maybe Fang. I
That's
mean,
what I
I'm
was
not
gonna
great at
say.
trivia, but I feel like they're one of the few characters that are like in actually every single book.
Well, I wanted to kind of pose this question as to we're very unique, or we're very privileged, I guess, in this situation that we see Hedwig die in two different ways, right? We see the book version where she's in her cage, right? She's like tucked in between Harry's feet in the sidecar, and she's killed that way. In the film, we see her flying and like free, and she's side along, and then she kind of just like kind of gets in the way, and is blasted. Which version of that is more, I want to say, upsetting, or
Mm.
like, obviously the death of any animal is very upsetting, and especially when it comes to Hedwig and Harry's companion for all these years. But which one do we think is the most, yeah, I guess I'm just going to keep with the word upsetting.
I've read the book. I've read the book like a long time ago, but I still remember what happened. But to be honest, when I saw like in the movie, even though the movie and the book are a bit different, like when I saw the scene of Hedwig got hit because she was very loyal. She was very protective of Harry. She loved him so much, and when she tried to attack the Death Eater that was trying to get to him, that also exposed him to Voldemort. Actually, that also exposed him. But that shows a lesson that animals, pets, or whatever are very loyal and very protective. And Hedwig is a big example, and I love it.
Mm, good point there.
Yeah, so saying the tired questions, answering about it, like what is most upsetting for me, it was a book version because she was in the cage, right? It's like she can't even go out like freely flying in the sky, like anywhere, like she can't even protect herself. Like in movie, you can see like she's trying to protect Harry, but like in books, like there is no choice, there is no option for her to do anything instead of just like sitting in the cage, and Harry has to use Confringo on the sidecar later on. Like just like you don't even see any remnants of her anywhere. Like there is not a single feather that you can even find to let her remember by, you know? Like it JK said that it's like ending the innocence of the Harry becoming more adult, like that's the transition, but still I don't think it's a transition, like ending the innocence just by killing an owl. Like that's a cruel way to picturize anything. Like that's a really cruel way. So like most upsetting portion was for me is from the book, not from the movie.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you point that out. That, I mean, this, living individual was kind of used as like kind of like a plot point to like make Harry grow up. Whereas like in the movie, at least she kind of seems to have more agency in that she's making this decision to be like flying and sort of like in the way of all the spells and like protecting Harry. So yeah, no, I do think that that's also Tyler for me. Like the book is a lot more sad. And then Nicole said, considering that for most pet birds, they recommend that you let them out in their room to be able to play and explore, the cage is more upsetting because with her flying, you can sort of take the option that she was trying to protect him rather than being trapped in a cage, unable to do anything to defend even herself. So, yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
I agree.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So Harry has known for many years now that Hedwig needs to be protected because she's so recognizable. So if it were you and you knew that your companion animal would need to potentially suffer, she liked delivering letters and she didn't get to, she'd be angry. There are a whole bunch of things, like Hedwig suffered because she was Harry's companion owl. I feel like if it were me, I would allow Hedwig to have a different person or stay at the Hogwarts Owlery or something like that. Like, I don't know. I feel like I would feel selfish by keeping her. So what would you do in that situation?
I'd say one other thing I always kind of wonder about is the fact that they have magic and we've proven that they can change the way that things look. Is the fact that why can't he disguise her as a different type of owl? Like transfiguration is a thing, and I'm relatively sure types of owls are similar enough. It wouldn't be too upsetting to become a different colored owl. So one, that is a thing that theoretically, based off the magic they have, should be possible. But I think it'd also be harder to just sort of give her away, because by the time it reaches a point where she is in danger by being Harry's companion, it's also at that point they've really bonded, And I think sort of being pushed aside like that would sort of be more emotionally difficult than just not necessarily being able to do all of the same letter delivering responsibilities.
Interesting point there.
Like in the book we see that she is not supposed to go out. That's what Harry said to her, that I can let you out, but like he can even just like send her to the burrow, like Weasley's house, and then say like you can stay there till like when I come back, or anyone, like I'll let anyone know to come back, because she is smart enough to go, like the owls are smart enough to deliver the letter. So like at least she can understand what Harry is trying to say, to like let her just freely roam anywhere. Like you can just go anywhere, and then you can go to like the Ron's place and just stay over there with like Big Pig and Errol and Hermes. Not Hermes because he's not with them, it's with Percy, but like still like she may have some other companions. So like she could have just stayed over there, not with Harry in the cage, just like Harry was in the Dursley's house.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing from everybody is that like there were options. And even though maybe Harry himself couldn't have done the magic since he was underage at that point still, like there were definitely other people who could have done the magic for him and helped him with that. So yeah. No, thank you, Valerie, for like asking that question. That was like a really, really good one. So the other animals that were present during that scene, of course, were the Thestrals. And so they were basically kind of looped into this whole plan where they could have been killed as well without their consent. I was wondering if anyone had any kind of, I mean, I found it kind of like unnerving that like half of them were like on brooms and the other half were on Thestrals in the book. And I'm just wondering if maybe we think that that was like a conscious decision to change that for the films, based on the fact that like these Thestrals could have died too, or if that was just kind of like for ease of production. I mean, it could have been both, but I like to think that maybe someone was like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have any more animals getting in harm's way. Like,
if the Protego Foundation were around when this film was made, maybe that horse thing, you know, or the fact that we wouldn't have as many animals, you know, being used. I think that would have been the case. But the realistic part of me is probably saying it's probably just a budget CGI thing. You know, they spent all that money on that beautiful Ukrainian iron belly. Like, that's what I think. But I do get exactly what you're saying. And to me, the logistics of it don't really make that much sense. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's explained why some folks are going on broom and some folks are going on Thestrals, is it?
not explicitly. I know that, for instance, Fleur was like not comfortable on one or the other, and so that's why I can't remember which one. But so that's why she and Bill went on something different.
I
But
think Parth, do you know?
Yeah, so it was like Fleur is not comfortable flying on the broomstick. Same way Hermione wasn't comfortable, so Hermione and Kingsley were on Thestrals, and Fleur and Bill were on Thestral like that, because they both hate flying on brooms. So that was the problem.
yeah.
See, that makes me a little upset, you know? Like,
Yeah.
we're going to put, first of all, I mean, Hermione is a great witch, you know, she'd be a great person to have on your team. But I'm just trying to think, like, if they were so afraid that, you know, they couldn't ride on a broom, is there somebody else that could have taken their spot, or you know, something like that? Like, did we really have to subject these Thestrals to possible death, you know, and experience the same fate that Hedwig experienced just because some folks were a little uncomfortable on a broom? You know, that's something that I'm thinking. I'm like, come on.
I feel like the plan itself wasn't necessarily like well thought out anyways, but that's neither here nor there. um, so maybe planning errors, I don't know. But it's interesting to me because, like, I mean, a lot of people, like, documented, like, in the books, the characters have, like, this aversion or fear, I guess, of these Thestrals anyways, but yet you're still going to use them to help achieve what you need to do. It's just kind of like a little bit of a disconnect there as well.
The thing is that we can say like most of the Death Eaters can see Thestrals because they have seen plenty of that anyway. So like if you think on a war perspective, like they actually, like whenever they're going on the war, they attack like elephant or horse or anyone to fall off the rider and kill them in like the war that is going on in medieval time and all the stuff. So like they could have targeted the Thestrals they are flying on, and that would have been like huge blowout for anyone. Like Thestral could have died for sure because they're flying, falling from that high altitude, and then whoever's riding on them is gonna be fall anyway. But you are just using a Thestral that has been like any animal has been used in all the history we have seen. So like it's a really weird choice to use animals anyway in any type of war for me. And also for Hermione, they says Hermione has a fear of flying actually. So I don't understand. Like she has a fear of flying on broomstick only, or on Thestral she is okay with flying on Thestral, because I don't remember she might have seen Thestrals later on, because I don't know if she has seen any death, like she can see them or not. So that's like flying invisibly on something. It's gonna be scary than just flying on broomstick. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, good point. Yeah, actually, the Death Eaters most definitely would have all been able to see the Thestrals, and so that kind of makes like a big target for them. So that's another sort of like hole in the plan there. Oh, but Nicole made a point that Harry was already publicly known to be familiar with riding Thestrals. So I mean that's probably another reason why they decided, oh well, let's have half on brooms, half on Thestrals, because these are both methods of transportation he's been known to use, and so it might confuse them. So that's a good point too. Yes, regardless of whether it was appropriate or not to do so. Oh, and Valerie, yeah, should have charmed another Ford Anglia with a better invisible button this time.
Well, and where's the night bus, huh? Surely the night bus can zig through
the air. That'd be so cool.
Like you can zigzag through this. I doubt a Death Eater can track you. I don't know.
Yeah.
But we have Stan Shenpike with the Death Eaters, so who's the conductor?
Yeah, I mean, I guess.
Well, but he was the conductor, not the driver.
Yeah,
So they
I was
could
gonna
have
say,
conductor
where's
list.
Ernie? What happened to Ernie? Ernie's not a Death Eater. Oh my God, could you imagine little old Ernie with his big old glasses as a Death Eater? Come on. I want that like worked into like his Death Eater mask, big old eyes. Okay.
That would have been great. But yeah, so let's move on to kind of what I now view as like one of the most tragic plot lines in this story. And Tyler, I'm wondering if you feel the same. Nagini. So this poor snake definitely is very vilified throughout the book. And of course, like the end goal is we have to kill her because she's a Horcrux and all of that stuff. Even if we're not taking into account like the supposed backstory of Nagini, like pre-Harry Potter. I mean, to me, it's very tragic because almost like with the basilisk, it's like she's kind of a captive of her circumstance, and like is in my opinion, like it was like not it shouldn't have had to have been necessary to kill her, but like now these characters are like, oh, we must kill her, and Harry even enlists Neville to do the job if he can't finish it. And I'm just like, it just like tore my heart out a little bit, because I'm just like, I mean, she's probably been very like manipulated and mistreated and stuff like that by Voldemort, and like, I mean, he can basically control her, at least the theory is that like he can control her with the parcel tongue stuff, like he's giving her orders all the time and everything. But so I'd love to hear people's thoughts on Nagini and her fate in this book.
So first of all, we don't see anything like is Nagini is being taken care of. Like are they giving her any food or anything to sustain herself? Anything. There is nothing said, at least, or just we saw her eating. What's the mother's race teacher? Charity Burbage. Like that's the only thing we see her eating anyway, and like Voldemort only gave her order to eat her, but she can't do anything before he tells her to do. And the thing is, like, we don't see anything like how he's taking care of Nagini, even though like it's his favorite snake, or like a companion, if we can go more according to that thread. But like I think it's more like a symbol of him being there of Salazar Slytherin to have a pet snake. That's why just like and we know how Voldemort sees other creatures other than the wizard, like we see in the creature still anyway. So yeah, so I don't think Voldemort ever cared about her anyway, and he just kept her with him because she was a Horcrux, has a part of his soul in her. That's why. So probably that. And even before that, if we go back to book 4, like we see Pettigrew milking the Nagini for Voldemort. So like using her venom to make a potion or something for Voldemort to just stay alive in that form. And we don't see Nagini doing anything else in the whole book or movie. Like how is she surviving? Or it's possibly like she can survive without food or water or anything. I don't know. Like if he's somewhere else, what is Nagini doing? Where is she kept? Like, is she allowed to because Voldemort's in control? Is he giving her choice to just move around in a Malfoy Manor or anywhere else? We don't know. So
yeah,
I feel so sorry for Nagini, even though we know she has been vilified, but still, like, it always pains me to see any creature just like treated that way. So
yeah, I think you made a great point that like Voldemort probably does not see her as her own being, rather as like his, because she has, you know, a piece of his soul in her, and something that provides the venom for him. Like I do not see him treating her with any regard as being an individual living being throughout this entire series. So yeah, that was a really good point. Tyler, your thoughts?
that's why sorry, Tyler. I think Voldemort is not vegan because
Parth,
yeah.
come on. No,
Yeah,
just kidding.
because yeah, like we have seen him using Quirrell to drink unicorn's blood, and we also seen him using Nagini's venom. So I'm sorry, but Voldemort's not vegan.
Fine, Parth. I'm out. No, it's and I do want to just point out, watching Nicole's face as you were explaining that, Parth, because I made that exact same face when I learned what the milking was, because early on in the Protego Foundation, you know, I was like, oh, Voldemort milks Nagini. I wonder if there's like a connection we can make there. And I like looked up, how do you milk a snake? And sure enough, that's where I found out that it's not, you don't actually milk them like, cows are forced to be milked. But no, you use their venom. And I was like, well, there goes my campaign idea. But no, I made the exact same face too. I was like, oh, duh.
Like that is still I mean, snakes venom is still like, taken from them in a lot of cases for like researching medication. Oh my gosh, Allie
Brought her own Nagini.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my god, a
He's
basilisk
wearing it like Voldemort would,
Swoon. Yeah, I mean, I'm always, and I feel like I've always been of two minds when it comes to the relationship between Voldemort and Nagini, right? There are times where I'm like, wow, I know this guy isn't capable of love, but I feel like the closest affection that he feels for somebody else is with Nagini. I've always gotten that like impression. And then there are other times where I'm like, oh, of course, he's using like this Grindelwaldian, manipulation, and he's doing a lot of things, because I have to think about what it must be like to be Nagini, right? And especially with the extrapolation of who she actually was before, right? If we are to take all of this Claudia Kim, Fantastic Beasts stuff into canon, then you have to sit down and really think about, wow, what has Voldemort told her? Somebody who's so broken, so damaged, who's clearly alone, who's gone through this very traumatic experience. And granted, we don't know everything about what it means to be a maledictus, but what has he told her to earn that level of trust, knowing who Nagini was in her human form, right? That's one of the things that I'm really excited about, that I hope we do get when it comes to Fantastic Beasts, is more of that relationship and seeing that vulnerability, right? Well, I feel like we already see Nagini in the Fantastic Beasts film very vulnerable, but I'd like to see more of that, because I often sit around and think, Voldemort in his most damaged phases, I wonder if Nagini was right there with him, right? And what their conversations must have been like, the years of solitude that Voldemort supposedly experienced. Maybe he did have somebody by his side the entire time, but it was Nagini, right? And what that relationship must have been like, I don't know. I'm of two minds of this relationship. But I guess, at the end of the day, he did put a Horcrux inside of her and then subjected her to that kind of targeting. So, that's not kind to do at all. But
yeah, and there's got to be like some story there. Like she must have been quite nearby whenever he created that Horcrux. So like that makes me curious as to maybe if there is more to just him feeling like, oh, she's a possession type of thing.
Yeah.
But like that's something that obviously we don't get that context of in the books, because it is Harry centric, obviously. So like there are things that we don't know since we are mostly looking through his eyes.
I do have a theory about that. So we do know that Voldemort inhabited many animals when he was, hiding. And what I'm thinking is going to play out is he went to go inhabit Nagini and somehow was able to have access or unlock, maybe it's through Legilimens, I don't know, but Legilimens, unlock what her story was and find out there's more to this snake than the past snakes that I've inhabited. What is your story? What's going on? Why, that I think that's kind of gonna how it'll play out.
That's an interesting notion for sure. We may never know, but hopefully we do.
Fingers crossed.
So actually, another topic I really wanted to bring up was the use of the basilisk fangs as the means to, quote, kill or get rid of Horcruxes. So obviously they're one of the very few tools in the wizarding world that can end a Horcrux. But I was just wondering, do we think, as mostly vegetarian vegan people, that it would still make it right to use them, given the stakes of what they were meant to use them for?
In terms of the basilisk fangs, like the ones that they get and use are from one that they actively murdered in the second book. But based off of like what is said, is it doesn't need to be like that. Like you could go and like have found a wild deceased basilisk and have sort of like effectively foraged it in a therefore ethical manner, or even if basilisks are basically a man-made species, so like iffy on if there should be any in the wild anyway. But you have the fact that you, in theory, it doesn't need to be from an animal that you had to go out and murder. It seems like it's something that lasts pretty much forever from when it's actually created. Plus, you have the idea of when they bring in the goblin forged weaponry, how if that is exposed at all ever to the venom, then it's just permanently imbued in it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that is not something that you would need to continually get at plus has potentially an option of an ethical foraging depending on where your stance is on the existence of basilisks as a created species.
Yeah, no, very, very true. And actually that kind of will line up with another topic I was going to talk about later if we had time, about the ethics of wand cores. Because if we, come to the decision that sure, it's ethical in this situation to like use the basilisk fangs, even though we are, very animal rights conscious, does that mean we then approve of any type of wand core that was foraged or found, even though it does come from an animal? So that's actually, thank you for bringing that up. That's a really good point. Tyler, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think Nicole, you hit on so many great points, and Ali in the chat as well has hit on so many that I 100% agree with. We're trying to stop this genocidal maniac, right? And up until this point, we're not really sure which or what other ways exist to destroy Horcruxes, right? The basilisk, she's dead, right? We know that. No, he's dead, right? Yeah, I think he because he's got the plume in the book, but he's dead, right? And if we can use, and to be fair to Nicole's point, basilisks are man-made. Like Herbo the Fowl, like get out, this guy, But the fact that they exist in and of themselves is an animal rights ethical conundrum. But who's the guy that's actually using or used the basilisk in book 2 to do all these awful things? It was Voldemort. And who are we trying to stop? We're trying to stop Voldemort. So in my mind, yes, it's unfortunate that basilisk, who has lived for so many years, centuries, was murdered. We do need to stop the person who was responsible for her being murdered, in my head. The basilisk could have continued to live down in the Chamber of Secrets for years and years until he would have died like a natural death. Who was the one that unleashed him onto the school? So in my mind, there's some kind of poetic justice to using that specific basilisk's fangs to destroy these Horcruxes. It's almost like hey, you put me in this position to be killed. Now I'm going to have these other people use my fangs to destroy every last little bit of you. It's this weird poetic thing that I love. But yeah, that's what I think. I think in this instance, we definitely, they're justified. Even if the entire gang was anti-speciesist, animal rights to the nth degree, vegan, they were justified in using the basilisk's fangs to destroy these Horcruxes.
Yeah. The basilisk's revenge.
Yeah, right. The name of my punk group.
that would be a good rock group name, like
yeah.
With a WROCK.
That's right.
Oh yeah, Ali mentioned, I think we do what we can to be vegan, but this is a full-on war, and preferably foraging them, or like an extraction when they're anesthetized. Not ideal. but it's kind of like feeding a companion cat its food, which includes meat or fish or whatever, or dogs, when they get, fed like chicken or whatever. Like sometimes as a vegan, you do have to like weigh the situation and kind of go for the thing that's going to be for the greater good, for lack of a better term. So yeah, I can see how that's definitely the case here with the basilisk fangs.
I just feel like using the basilisk fangs, first of all, I don't think anyone really knew that was a thing. It was kind of an accident, happy accident. But the other two, we only know of two other ways to destroy a Horcrux, right? Fiend fire and the killing curse, potentially, which might not always work. I feel like those two, even though supposedly fiend fire is like a really difficult spell, I feel like it'd still be easier to figure out how to use that than like find a basilisk or like breed a basilisk and then use their venom from their fang that you would have to extract. So yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice of how to destroy a Horcrux.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think it would be justified post Deathly Hallows, maybe. But I think in the moment, it's like, okay, all right, yeah, sure, go.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's a nice tie-in.
Yeah, I Tyler, I like how you brought that up, and it's like, oh yeah, it is kind of like justice for the basilisk that it gets to help end, or he gets to help end Voldemort, who kind of caused his death in the first place.
Right.
Yeah. So obviously from the first part of our chat here, a lot of people really loved the dragon, and I adore the dragon from Gringotts as well. So let's talk about her, him, her. I don't know. I don't think the book mentions it.
In Diagon Alley, they refer to the dragon as a she.
Oh, okay. She.
I've always known her as a she.
That's what I thought.
That matters.
But I mean, obviously, in that part of the story, we can see so many parallels to how animals are treated in our world. Particularly with like, I mean, what comes to mind for me is like training elephants at circuses when they were using like bull hooks to train the elephants. Except here we have a dragon being taught to expect pain at the same time as hearing these metal clankers. And I'm just wondering, like, I know Harry had the like epiphany to free the dragon, and it kind of helped them escape, but I'm just wondering, like, how much do we think the trio like felt horrible about how that dragon was being treated? I mean Hermione, obviously, I'm pretty sure we can guess that she felt that way. But like, did they realize to the extent like how awful that was? Yeah, if anyone has any thoughts on that whole situation. And do we think actually that the dragon, would the goblins have like been able to keep it there even if Harry, Ron, Hermione hadn't freed it at that time? Like if they had managed to find another way out, do you think that they would have like made a stink and been like, hey, this is wrong, like let's change this, let's get her out of there, like post-war?
I know that the idea of Gringotts having dragons in the vaults has been established since book one, right? Harry and Hagrid are grinding down, and Harry mentions seeing, one of the tunnels off to his left having just fire, coming out, so we kind of get a hint of this. So I personally think that there's not only one Ukrainian Iron Belly down there, but I think there's an entire colony down there. I would not be surprised if we were to find that the depths of Gringotts house more dragons against their will than the Romanian dragon sanctuary. I would not be surprised to find that information out. And I think that this, to me, like there are I can probably count on one hand the biggest animal rights messages in the entire Harry Potter series. This one to me is a very, very strong second. If we were to take elves, dues, and houses as number one, the use of the Ukrainian Iron Belly down in the vault of Gringotts, she's abused. She's been taught to fear pain at a specific sound. She's used to guard. Catherine, you mentioned how this dragon reminds you of elephants used for training. I'm often reminded of dogs forced to live outside and at the end of a heavy chain or in a parking lot, used as nothing more than a cheap security system. That situation is what I'm often reminded of whenever I get to this spot. This poor dragon, she's literally, we have magic. We're in a world of magic. We can do endless possibilities, but yet we're still relying on these high security vaults being guarded by another being. And because of that, she's blind, she has scars, she's beaten, she's chained, just like these dogs in our world, right? We have the most advanced technology, surveillance systems, whatever we need to do. And yet people still rely on using dogs as a cheap security system. You see these puppies down in these rural communities. I'm specifically thinking of, Northeast North Carolina, where they just exist to be used as like, hey, somebody's coming into my yard. I only know that because my dog's barking, right? And you see these photos of these awful situations that these dogs are forced to live in, and I can't help but make that connection to that Ukrainian Iron Belly. So it's very upsetting to me whenever we get to this point, because I really do think this analogy right here is, to me, the second strongest animal rights message in the entire Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
I'm getting choked up even thinking about it.
Yeah,
The situation, not
agree.
the dragon. Yeah.
I completely agree with that. Oh yeah, Nicole made a good point. That the goblins themselves have been like on the receiving end of a lot of speciesism from the wizards in the wizarding world, and yet they're kind of like placing that even further on this dragon and potentially more than one dragon. And yet they're like, their magic is, stronger than humans in some respects. And why resort to, forcing a species into subservience, like you've kind of been forced into that subservience. I mean, to me, it's sometimes that, kind of happens in terms of like human dynamics, where if someone feels victimized by another human, they might turn around and, cause another person to be victimized by like their anger or abuse or whatever. So it could be something like that. The other thing I'm wondering is like, maybe goblins, because they aren't afforded the wand carrying rights, felt that they had no choice other than to use this drastic measure. I mean, that may be me just kind of giving them the benefit of the doubt, but like, I'm wondering if they had the full range of access to wizard style magic, would they have still like resorted to using a dragon in that manner?
Answering your earlier question about what happened if after the Deathly Hallows, that if the dragons have been rescued or have been like any activism about the dragon to be rescued. So we see Hermione, our own activist, saying that's like hearing everything about dragons, like that's barbaric. That's her choice of words. Like it's really brutal to see the dragons like that. I believe she might have done something about the dragons below the Gringotts if she knew. But the thing about this, like, we don't see, like, we know Hermione knows all the stuff about Wizarding World. She has read everything, almost everything about it. So why can't we see her taking stands for dragons before? Or maybe the books has been edited by the wizards or goblins, saying that same way we are blind with the animals are treated well in dairy industries or in a slaughterhouse or anything. Not really, but that's what we have been hearing from the people.
Mm-hmm.
Like the same way it can be blinded to the wizarding community, how dragons are treated. And going back to the goblin magic, we can see that they made some exquisite amount of the relics, like you see Gryffindor sword and other goblin made plates or anything. So I can see and the vaults only can be opened by them only. No one else can open the vault. If they want, they can even close the vault and no one can even come out of the vault. Not like if you are stuck in a room, you can open the room from inside. No, nothing like that, right?
Mhm.
So I believe they could have done more, but I think it's the humans' influence of their laziness, maybe. So they just stopped taking all the thing in their own hand instead of and using other means, just as the wizards are using other things. So that's my thought.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point.
Parth, I love what you said just now, and this is a moderate non sequitur to the dragon and Gringotts bit, but when you were talking about Hermione's role too earlier on, have we had the discussion either as a book club or otherwise on maybe hypothesizing what kind of policies on an animal rights front that Hermione would have enforced as minister, like given her role in the government?
I don't think we have, because we've mainly been sticking to like what's currently in the books and not any of like the post-book stuff. But I mean, feel free, go ahead if you want to postulate any theories on that.
I don't want to spiral. I just wanted to open it up for the group in case there might be some fun thoughts there. But again, I as Parth said, like, I still think this might be a movieism. I can't remember if she actually said it in the book, but that's barbaric just resonates. And of course, like, I know like she's had her own journey from an activist standpoint. Like, I think we said in another one of our book clubs, we were like, oh, Hermione's like that activist where she's like, I'm not species. Like, my professor is a werewolf. Like, I can't be speciesist, which is like, it's sort of performative and like in a way sort of perfunctory too. But I mean, I think that comment and that quote that Parth was referencing before too, just goes to show her growth and her evolution too. I think my first book club was maybe Goblet of Fire, and we were talking about how performative her activism was. And it's just like, I don't know, kind of a nice marker of growth, and goes to show that there might be more beyond book 7 of what kind of policy she can institutionalize too.
Yeah, no, actually that I wouldn't have even like thought of that, but you're right. Because in this instance, she's like, I mean, technically like Harry in the books was the one that freed the dragon, but like she's very much like taking action in this instance, and it's not like baby activism, as it were. She's definitely grown. That's such a great observation. And while we're on this topic of dragons, we actually had a podcast episode that just came out today about Charlie Weasley and, you know, theorizing if he was vegan or not. And so it just made me think, if Charlie Weasley knew about this poor dragon in Gringotts, like how angry and pissed off he would be about it. So even if Hermione didn't like, you know, make policies herself or help to like get policies passed, like I'm sure if she mentioned it to Charlie, he would be like, no, this is not happening. Like, I'm surprised that he and Bill have not had a conversation about this. Like,
you know how like Farm Sanctuary, like the organization Farm Sanctuary, does like a lot of advocacy work too. I would like to see the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary do some advocacy work. Like maybe this is a campaign that they can spearhead, you know?
Yeah.
Like I just want to see like wizard protesters outside Gringotts with signs, you know, magical signs that are floating of their own accord, like, because that's how I imagine wizarding protests. You know, just magical, you know, no more dragons in Gringotts, you know, that kind of thing. Like I want to see that. That's the kind of stuff that I want to see.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Fanfic coming soon. Right, Allie? Allie will write it for us.
Yes. Well, and hey, she did that illustration from like Goblet of Fire book club with the people, you know, protesting by the lake, and had their little wands up and the signs floating above the wands and everything. So, hey,
see?
That's how wizard protests work. So I can see it happening. But I feel like out of all of the animal rights stories in this series, or like any type of like comparisons we can make with our own world. Like this one to me had the sweetest ending in that the dragon is free, you know, she's sitting by the lake, like, and Hermione's like, oh, I wonder if she'll be okay. And Ron's like, she's a dragon. Like she can take care of herself. And it made me so happy. Like out of all of the creatures, she has been like the most abused really that we've seen in this series, and she gets to have a happy ending. And that was just perfect for me. Let's see, Tyler, and then we'll go to Parth after that.
I just wanted to kind of echo that point in that this is the spot that I think the movie does really well. Is there's that moment where she's climbed up out of, you know, Gringotts, and she's sitting there, right? And the camera's panning around her. You know, we see all of the top of Diagon Alley, and there she is. She's just breathing in the fresh air for what is probably, I would probably say, the first time, you know, because we don't know where, you know, these dragons come from. We don't know if they've been, you know, bred and born, hatched down in the vaults of Gringotts, but she's up there, and for the first time, she's seeing that sky and she's breathing that air. And there's just something about that moment that just every single time, just I'm like, oh, I need a tissue, you know, because it is just, oh, it's so good. And I feel the exact same way every time I go to Universal Orlando and I see her up there. I'm like, you're free, girl. Go, you know, do whatever you need to do. So
yeah,
I always get so choked up at that part.
Yeah, because that's at the end of the day, that's what we want for all creatures, is to have that feeling of I can breathe the free air, I can go where I want, I can do what I want, and no human is going to keep me in a cage. Like that's why we do what we do. So yeah, I'm getting teary too. Perth, what do you have to say?
Most of the time what we see with the circus animal or zoo animals, like if they are being released in the wild for life, like 80% of them can't survive in their own natural habitat if they have been bred or raised on that specific atmosphere, right? So like maybe maybe she was okay, like she can survive the Ukrainian, I believe, but we might know what happened to others, like that if they have been freed afterwards post Deathly Hallows, and if they have been accepted as Romanian Dragon Sanctuary or anywhere else, like for their well-being, because they have a PTSD, everything, like they can even flinch in the littlest of sound. So like we don't know how, like just maybe freeing the Ukrainian heart blind annually in the world, just like it was a good idea or not. So like I can see Hermione's concern about that, but like Ron saying that, oh, that's fine, she's just a dragon, but she is old, blind, she has been scarred, and we don't know like the sound the goblins used to hurt her. Maybe she can hear anywhere else in the world, like the similar sound or anything. It can maybe cause more collateral damage to herself or to others. So
Yeah,
I hope she's been looked after if there is any problem with that. So yeah,
actually that's a really good point. And I would actually worry that, like, since she is blind, maybe she would have trouble like with I mean, obviously dragons don't think about adhering to the International Statute of Secrecy, but if there's some, you know, blind dragon flying around that no one knows where she is, like that might be a problem. So yeah, if they could have like figured out a way to help her get to like the Romanian Dragon Sanctuary, that probably would have been the best way, and like to help like get her rehabilitated and well again. And yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I mean, like Hermione's concern is definitely justified. But fortunately, I don't think dragons have any natural predators in the world, so at least she wouldn't have to worry about that. But yeah. Oh, I wanted to make mention. Oh yeah, Nicole says, Nicole Herring, other Nicole H. that the Gringotts dragon got her own form of a basilisk revenge, and then Allie was like, "Oh, we should have a series of books called Creature's Revenge, and a different book for each animal deserving of that revenge from the Harry Potter series." That'd be so cool. But yeah, and I agree, Tyler. Parth, you should run for the Department for the Regulation Control of Magical Creatures, because your viewpoints are always just like so on point. Yes, bravo. Yeah, so any other thoughts on the dragon? Should we name her? Does she need a name? No, the nameless dragon.
Yeah. I think she should always be nameless. I know, well, Valerie, you can kind of confirm this or not. I've heard that the one in Diagon has a name.
Oh, does she?
Yeah, that's what I've heard. It's not like an official, but
Yeah, when Diagon first opened, she did, but I think it was just the employees that named her, and I don't remember what the name was. So it was not like official, and I doubt that anyone remembers. But I'll actually do some research on that and see if anyone does remember.
Sick.
Yay. I'm glad we had like a happy animal rights sort of ending to that one. But let's move on, because we've only got like 20 minutes left. Oh my goodness. To the topic that I think Tyler wanted to talk about, the acromantulas. Yeah, so yeah, there's been this thread throughout the books, obviously, of like, ew, ick, spiders, because we've got, Ron who's afraid of spiders, and then like the whole thing in Chamber of Secrets where the spiders almost eat Harry and Ron, which is still kind of Harry and Ron's fault because they were the ones that like went into the acromantula's lair. But the interesting turn for this book is that now we see that the spiders have like, quote, chosen a side. And so like the author has made this decision to make these spiders actually on the side of evil, which, I mean, in my opinion, doesn't really help the connotation that people already have about spiders. And I'm very guilty of that as well, of being like, oh, spiders. I'm a very like Ron type of person. But then we also get to see, after Hagrid is like, no, don't hurt them, they carry him off because, like, I think maybe perhaps this will make him realize that he's been kind of like idealizing these creatures, but they actually like have a mind of their own, and they're not going to just listen to him, even though he was like the one that helped bring them into existence. So actually that was kind of like a really good moment for me. I was like, okay, maybe Hagrid's going to learn from this. But also, like, it's really complicated because then you find out that they've been kicked out of their home and their nest by the Death Eaters, who have kind of like taken over that space to make it their kind of like base in the forest during the war. So yeah, I want to hear everyone's thoughts on like this complex, basically group of characters that are kind of like flung into this war that wasn't of their own making.
So it's nobody's surprise I have some thoughts on this. And I don't think that we're going to go the direction that you might think. And I'm going to try to keep this quick, but I've been thinking a lot about what is at the root of what is inspiring so many people when it comes to Grindelwald's message, right? As we continue to get new Fantastic Beasts series and that kind of thing. I was really sitting with, what does it mean to be inspired by Grindelwald? What is he promising, right? And at the end of the day, Grindelwald's message is liberation, right? The magical society has been suppressed and marginalized for centuries under the International Statute of Secrecy, right? Now, what was at one point for their own protection, I believe now isn't the case, right? And to me, Voldemort in this war, I think he's approaching all of these marginalized groups, whether they be trolls, acromantulas, werewolves, and he's coming to them with this same kind of thought. He's saying, you have been marginalized, you have been oppressed by the magical society, and we want to break that. Here's what we need to do. We need to overthrow the current system that we're forced to live in, that has subjected you to the outside of an even more niche community, right? So to me, I see the acromantulas, the trolls, the werewolves as hoping for a better world, hoping for a world where they won't be marginalized, where they won't be subjected, where that kind of feeds into this whole idea of wizard liberation. And I think, sure, Voldemort is an awful person, Grindelwald is an awful person. They have other ulterior motives, you know, of course. But at the end of the day, I think there's something fundamentally good here about the idea of liberating the magical community. And in that, Voldemort is presenting this idea that, hey, join me, and you don't have to be subjected to this small portion of the forest. Join me, and you don't have to be a werewolf forced to live in a cave. Join me, and you don't have to be a troll only able to live in this small section of mountain. I think there's something very, very appealing for these marginalized communities and these marginalized species that leads me to say, I don't blame them for wanting to join Voldemort. I really don't. Now, I may be totally off base here, and I would love to know everybody else's thoughts, but that's what I've been playing with for the last, little bit here.
Yeah. I mean, my first reaction to that is like, at face value, like I definitely can see that. I'm just wondering how much of it was genuine on Lord Voldemort's part and how much of it was manipulative to get more expendable soldiers.
I think I would say a lot of it is manipulative and Voldemort part. I think that we see that a lot, talking about marginalized communities. There are a lot of like in the non-magical world, in the muggle world, groups of people who are told things by governments or who are told things by big corporations and kind of led to believe that if you do this, then you will benefit this way. And it's just a very sort of manipulative tactic in order to get compliance, I think. And it especially affects marginalized communities, specifically in like the non-magical world, Black and Brown communities, and people living near areas of like food deserts or living in, things like that. And so I think that, you could take that and apply it to, having a leader who says, come with me and you'll get this, this, and this, but really he's exploiting them because they might not have another option at this point. And I think that happens a lot in other areas of the world too. There are other areas, other social justice, non-magical things. So that's a good point, Tyler.
Yeah. I'm also wondering though, like why, if he was going to go to all the trouble of picking marginalized groups, I mean, there were certain ones it didn't even seem like he even tried to approach. Like, for instance, the centaurs, who in the end ended up fighting against Voldemort. And I'm just wondering, like, what his thought process was for picking and choosing which marginalized groups he would want to fight for him.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, if we see, like, on the Grindelwald perspective, says the liberation. But if you see, like, Nagini didn't join Grindelwald at end of the second movie, where Credence joined Grindelwald, but Nagini stayed back. So maybe Voldemort is more manipulative for Nagini because she joined Voldemort but not Grindelwald, or maybe she might join Grindelwald later on, we don't know. But so I also think it's more about Voldemort's manipulative sides, that he can take control over anyone if he wants to, because he's a quite good legilimens, and he can actually unlock memories and use them for his advantage. So I believe he could have made a better point to all the other creatures. And we also see in like the starting of book 7, when Minister Gringotts comes to see the trio for the Albus Nobilis will, we see Lupin hurriedly disappear before they came, because the ministry is anti-werewolf at that time. And we see what's like if Voldemort say like if we take over the ministry, the werewolf will get their chance to get revenge or redeem themselves. So yeah, like they would have gotten it faster because they have been oppressed for like more than like half of the century, or maybe since they come to existence, I guess. But yeah, so like Voldemort will make like he knows how to take advantage of the situation. So it's probably because of that that creatures have joined Voldemort. But like we see centaurs didn't, because as we see centaur uses divination, they know what's coming and they know which is the good side and the bad side, because in book one also we see Firenze save Harry from the hooded figure. So yeah. So we probably they know better than, and because we know like they haven't joined their the ministry has a way worse treatment towards the centaur than any other creatures, because they refuse to join. I don't remember the exact term, but I believe I know what we are talking about. All the when they classifying them in the beast being and the other category, I don't remember. So yeah,
they weren't keen to go under the ministry's like categorization.
Categorizations.
They are.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing that's why maybe they know that Voldemort is just using them, like the ministry is trying to use them for maybe Voldemort feared them more if they go on the other side. So he just want to take as many as expendable warriors in his side as he can. So that's my point.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think Allie mentioned kind of along similar lines, like maybe Voldemort went towards groups that wouldn't fight back as easily and felt like they needed that safety in numbers. Probably, Allie, I'm assuming that's what you're kind of going for with that comment?
Yeah, like numbers, or just like, I don't want to bring up like intelligence levels and stuff, but ones that maybe don't have the ability to kind of formulate plans and organize as like, a union sort of thing. So maybe ones who are more independent thinking, I guess.
Yeah.
But I feel like it has to do with creatures who Voldemort thinks he could control easier. So like centaurs would be more difficult. Goblins more difficult. Like there's certain levels of,
Yeah. And I think Valerie and Nicole also made some good points that like the centaurs already had an encounter with Voldemort and kind of knew he was a a bad dude. So that probably he may have realized, even if he tried to recruit them, because they are much maligned by the ministry, they probably would have refused anyways, because they don't like Voldemort's vibes.
Also, the centaur has their own self-respect, because they don't take orders from anyone else, not the ministry. So why would they take orders from Voldemort? So yeah, that's all.
Yeah, another thought that I kind of thought while I was listening to Parth was that, I mean, maybe the types of creatures that joined Voldemort versus the types that joined Harry were also just kind of like literary choices, because it seems to me like the ones that were on Voldemort's side are the ones that we've been kind of like conditioned to view as like bad or scary or destructive, and then the ones that are on Harry's side are the ones that are like we've been conditioned to see as like majestic, like Buckbeak or centaurs. Like we see them in a better light in this story and even other stories outside of Harry Potter. So that could be just as indicative of like the author's view on certain creatures and beings as well. I think Tyler, you put a comment oh yeah, like what happened to these communities like after the war? Were they punished? I mean, I hope not. I hope people would realize that like Voldemort was being very manipulative, and if he hadn't come to them, they probably would have just kept to themselves still. But knowing it's the wizarding world, and the wizarding world doesn't have a good track record of treating these groups, you know, I kind of, yeah, it's an unanswered question that like we don't know what happened to them, and that's kind of scary actually. I
Yeah.
mean, Tyler, do you have any theories that you would want to postulate about that?
I mean, very similar to what you were saying. I mean, the worst thing that I think that could be an outcome from this situation is that everything went back to normal, right? Everything, the status quo was maintained, and nobody asked the question, why did these communities join Voldemort? What was it about what he was promising them that led them to join a war that was ultimately not involving them at all? I think to a certain degree it involved them, you know, if we go back to the wizard liberation, creature liberation thing. But at the end of the day, I really do hope that maybe Hermione, when she did join the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, that she did go to these communities and say, what was it that made you want to join? Was it truly wanting to afford yourself and your community autonomy, you know, that you haven't been afforded before? And then that gets into the idea of, you know, what kind of power would she be able to give? Because again, we're still working in this confine of the International Statute of Secrecy. So, you know, I like I said, I think the worst thing that could have happened is that nobody cared, nobody asked the question, and everything just stayed the same. The Acromantulas were still forced to live in that part of the Forbidden Forest. You know, the trolls were transported back to their designated space, and the werewolves were still discriminated against. You know, I think that's the worst thing that could have happened in this entire situation.
Yeah. Yeah, and Allie made a comment in the chat about like they would most likely be deemed accomplices. And like, I mean, that's a very loaded, you know, question with any war, even with, you know, just human wars. Like, you know, do we view the losers as like completely bad and like punish them and stuff? Or do we realize that they had felt maligned and trodden down upon? And do we try to fix that rather than using punishment as a tool? Or like you said, just not even doing anything and just having it still be back to the status quo. And yeah, like Nicole Herring mentioned, like imagine the Ministry sending the Dementors to Azkaban, like and trying to like do that to get them either back in line or like I mean, I don't see that happening. I think they probably just kind of like skedaddled. But but yeah, like, you know, having those maligned and trodden down groups on the losing side of the war could actually like reinforce people's prejudices of them, like Nicole Higgins mentioned. Like, and in that case, it might actually even be worse than like just being back to the status quo. Like it could have led to some sort of retribution, which is like, in my opinion, like not like decent of the wizarding world to do that. Like they really should recognize that there was a reason that these creatures turned against them. But yeah, we have no like, I mean, the epilogue obviously is very happy-go-lucky, so we have no way to know of like what the outcome of this war was for those groups. But yeah, if anyone has any other comments on that, I'd love to hear those.
I just put in the chat that I think in an ideal world, there would be like a system in place for rehab or like programs to help tackle the root causes of why these groups joined up, because it's like the idea of, you know, eliminating like houselessness by, you know, getting rid of the problem, but really like, why are there unhoused people? Like, because there's like lack of job security, lack of, you know, programs in place for like health, mental health, and like drug use and all of these things. Like, so it's not necessarily like, okay, we can just ignore the fact that these people joined up, or these creature people joined up with Voldemort. Let's see, like, what is it about the way that they're living in this like wizard dominated world that we can do to shift that for them to be more comfortable and more to have more rights, you know, in their own lives. So
Yeah. Let's see. Nicole wrote, there was a certain amount of forgiveness after the First War, with a lot of wizards getting away with saying I was imperious. So yeah, maybe Kingsley Shacklebolt did bring some empathy to the trials. Actually, out of any of the wizards, I could see Kingsley being one of the most empathetic. So maybe, yeah, if we could learn what he did as Minister of Magic, like after the war, maybe that could shed some light on if there was some actual change for creatures in the wizarding world.
Yeah, so we know that Kingsley removed the Dementors from Azkaban later on.
Right.
Right? So like we knew that in book 6 and 7 that the Dementor breeds and there are too many Dementors in the world. What happened to those? Like I'm actually like worried, maybe that's the word I'm using right now, but like well, what's happening, like there is still despair in the world, like probably, but like if they are just like roaming around in the world anywhere and like just like taking the souls of the people, how what's the chance? Because Dementor is like, we don't know much about like how they are made or how that, like we only know that only Patronus charm can repel them, but it's not like that can destroy them or make them less in numbers. I don't know, like maybe there is a portion that the world was happy after the war that they might have reduced, but like how is that possible? Like we see that they are increased in numbers because of all the despair and gloominess that's happening around the world, like the death and all the calamities. But still, like if we are seeing right now in the world what's happening, it might say that there are too many Dementors out here, but like we don't know what's happening to, like if their numbers can increase, are they supposed to decrease? We don't know. So yeah.
Ooh, Tyler, I want you to talk about your comment.
Yeah, I mean, so I put this in the comment, but I do think that the kindest thing would have been to euthanize them. A Dementor has to rely on despair, on happiness. That's what they feed off of, right? Now, unless there's some kind of way that we can keep a 24/7 Patronus charm going where they can feed off of that, I'm not sure about the practicality of it. And then in addition to that, how do we keep them from breeding? I see this kind of, it's a really messed up way to think about this, but it's very similar to, I think, over the companion animal overpopulation crisis, right? If we get to the root of it, spay and neuter, I don't think you can spay and neuter a Dementor, but this idea of stopping more Dementors from being introduced. If there was some way that a Dementor could live, in some kind of designated Dementor sanctuary or something where they can live out the rest of their lives, cool. If not, we can't subject people, we can't subject, animals to this idea of you have to provide despair for this Dementor to live. So I think in that situation where we have an overpopulation of Dementors who really can't do anything and who are going to suffer if they can't eat, that kind of thing, then I think the kindest thing that the wizarding world would probably be able to do is euthanize them, give them a kind release from a world that has been so messed up and cruel to them. And yeah, that's what I think maybe could have been, a last resort.
That's an interesting thought. And I think it kind of brings the conversation back to something we mentioned earlier about like even though we're vegan and even though we want, the best for all these creatures possible, like you do have to do like what's for the greatest good sometimes, and that might have been just like one of those circumstances, and for their own benefit too, like because I mean, like they really had nowhere to go after the war, except to disperse throughout the world and away from the home that they had always known and try and find despair somewhere to live off of. But in that case, like you do have to protect the people as well. from being victims of the Dementor's kiss or whatever. And oh yeah, Nicole had a couple of comments. With Dementors, would it reach the point of pushing for full species extinction? And also, like the fact that Dementors were not man-made. Yeah, it's a conundrum because like technically like they are their own being. And like, yeah, no, it is a very hot take to kind of like talk about like the extinction of an entire species. I mean, obviously a species like this with this kind of parallel does not exist in our world. So fortunately we don't have to like make an opinion about that in terms of like real world animals, but yeah, no, that's quite a conundrum you've placed upon us, Tyler.
I'm sorry. And if I can just twist this conundrum a little more here.
Oh dear.
And I don't have an answer for this, right? I just want people to kind of chew on this, let it sit with you for a little bit. But do we need to keep a species like Dementors alive if they're only going to be subjected to captivity or not living out their own natural needs, right? Because that's the argument, right? If we were to keep a few Dementors around, then what we would have to have some way to take care of them, find them a space where they can live, you know, this kind of thing. Is it better to have this kind of a species go extinct? I don't know. I don't have the answer.
Yep,
but
yeah, we don't have the answers.
You know, it is something to chew on. Is it right to keep a species going if they're only going to be subjected to exploitation and captivity?
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
But yeah, definitely. I mean, the counterpoint to that, I think Valerie and Nicole made some decent points that it would sort of probably affect some sort of ecosystem balance or some balance in the environment, at least from where they originally came from. Potentially, like I'm not sure we know enough about Dementors to kind of make that determination, but like we definitely see that in the real world where if you take one species out, especially if let's for instance call Dementors an apex predator, if you take out an apex predator from the ecosystem, the entire food chain might collapse, or like a certain species might overgrow and like there's too much and then it causes an entire mess of chaos in that ecosystem. So yeah, that's definitely something to chew on for sure. Oh, Nicole mentioned she thinks that they're supposed to have been found naturally on the island that was used for Azkaban. So maybe there's a way to keep them there. I mean, that's a possibility. Like
that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
You know, somewhere where they can be themselves, where they can be their own being again, right? Because
yeah,
Cornelius Fudge coming in, using them, exploiting them as guards in Azkaban, let them be their own community, right? We don't need to interact with them.
Yeah. And it would be interesting to see what would happen if, for instance, like they never came into contact with any more despair. Like maybe there would be an evolution and they would become an entirely new thing to adapt to that lack of depression and sadness and chaos. Yeah, no, that's really, really good question. But now that's kind of my headcanon, like a little sanctuary on what used to be Azkaban Island for the Dementors. Obviously, we would not be putting wizards back in there, I don't think. I think they need to find a more humane way to deal with wizarding prisoners and stuff like that. But anyways, oh goodness, we've gone over a little bit with that very dense conversation. So I actually just wanted to kind of steer us towards the epilogue a little bit, where of course, I mean, it's very happy-go-lucky, everything's resolved, even if there are a few plot points that we don't get resolved, like for the most part, everything is all good. But, you know, of course, again, we see new generations with the kids taking their owls to school, and then you're just like, oh, they're not old enough to know how to properly take care of such a complex creature. But anyways, I think my favorite quote of the book is in this chapter, and it's also the best quote that I've found so far about any magical creature. And it's when Harry's talking to Albus about the Thestrals. And he says, Thestrals are nothing to worry about. They're gentle things. There's nothing scary about them. And to me, that kind of echoes like a theme that we've been talking about throughout the series, throughout these book clubs, that like, no matter our like preconceived notions about certain creatures or beings, there's really, nothing to be scared of about them. They're their own being. They're worthy of space. They're worthy of life. And it's so gratifying to see Harry kind of explain that to his son. So yeah, with that is our last book club of the series. Thank you everyone for being here and for coming every month. It's been so enlightening, and I know we've all loved hearing each other's opinions and thoughts about the books and reading them in a new way. And we are going to do like a little wrap up trivia party next month. Bring your own vegan butterbeer if you can. So please plan on joining us. It'll be the last Wednesday of the month, the 27th at 8 p.m. Eastern time. But yeah, thank you all for being here, and I hope you have a great night.